Chapter 15. "What about the horse?" Ezio asked. "Turn her loose. She'll find her way back to her stable." "I can't abandon her." "You must. We're going back to the city. If we let her go there, they'll know you got back. If they find the horse out here, they'll think, with luck, that you're still wandering around this area and divert their search here." Ezio reluctantly did as he was told, and Machiavelli led him to a concealed flight of stone steps leading underground. At the foot of them a torch was burning, which Machiavelli seized. "Where are we?" asked Ezio. "This leads to a system of ancient underground tunnels that crisscross the city. Your father discovered them, and they have remained the assassin's secret ever since. We can use this route to avoid any guards who are out looking for us, because you may be sure that the wolfman who escaped will raise the alarm. They're big because they were used for transport and troops in ancient times, and they're well built too, as everything was in those days. Many of the outlets within the city have collapsed now and are blocked, so we must pick our way carefully. Stay close. It would be fatal for you to get lost down here." For 2 hours they passed through a labyrinth that seemed never-ending. On the way, Ezio glimpsed side tunnels, blocked entranceways, strange carvings of forgotten gods over archways, and the occasional flight of steps, some leading upwards, some leading into blackness, a few others showing a glimmer of light at their heads. Finally Machiavelli, who had kept up a steady but hurried pace all along, paused at one such flight. "We're here," he announced. "I'll go first. It's almost dawn. We must be careful." He vanished up the steps. After what seemed an age, during which Ezio wondered if he had been abandoned, he heard a whispered, "All clear," from Machiavelli. Despite his fatigue, Ezio ran up the steps, glad to be back in fresh air. He'd had enough of tunnels and caves to last a lifetime. He emerged from a kind of big manhole into a large room, large enough to have been a warehouse of sorts once. "Where are we?" "On an island in the Tiber. It was used years ago as a depot. No one comes here now except us." "Us?" "Our Brotherhood. It is, if you like, our hideout in Rome." A burly, confident young man rose from a stool by a table on which lay papers and the remains of a meal, and came to greet them. His tone was open and friendly. "Niccolo, ben trovato." He turned to Ezio. "And you? You must be the famous Ezio. Welcome." He took Ezio's hand and shook it warmly. "Fabio Orsini at your service. I've heard a lot about you from my cousin, an old friend of yours, Bartolomeo d'Alviano." Ezio smiled at the name. "A fine warrior," he said. "It was Fabio who discovered this place," put in Machiavelli. "Every convenience here," said Fabio. "And outside it's so overgrown with ivy and what-not, you wouldn't even know it existed." "It's good to have you on our side." "My family has taken a few bad blows from the Borgia of late, and my one aim is to kick their stall in and restore our patrimony." He looked around doubtfully. "Of course, this may all seem a bit shabby to you, after your accommodations in Toscana." "This is perfect." Fabio smiled. "Bene. Well, now that you have arrived, you must forgive me, but I must leave you immediately." "What are your plans?" asked Machiavelli. Fabio's face became serious. "I'm off to begin preparations for Romagna. Today, Cesare has control of my estate and my men, but soon, I hope, we will be free again." "Buona fortuna." "Grazie. Arrivederci." "Arrivederci." And with a friendly wave, Fabio was gone. Machiavelli cleared a space on the table and spread out the encrypted letter, together with the Wolfman's decoding page. "I have to get on with this," he said. "You must be exhausted. There's food and wine there, and good, clear Roman water. Refresh yourself while I work, for there is still much to be done." "Is Fabio one of the allies of whom you spoke?" "Indeed, and there are others. One very great indeed." "And he is? Or is it a she?" Ezio asked, thinking, despite himself, of Caterina Sforza. He could not get her out of his mind. She was the Borgia's prisoner still. His own private priority was to free her. But was she playing games with him? He could not rid his mind of a grain of doubt. She was a free spirit, though. He did not own her. Only he did not relish the thought of being played for a fool. And he did not want to be used. Machiavelli hesitated, as if he had already divulged too much. But then he spoke. "It is the Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. He was in competition with Rodrigo for the papacy and lost. But he is still a powerful man, and he has powerful friends. He has potentially strong connections with the French, but he bides his time. He knows that King Louis is only using the Borgia for as long as it suits him. Above all, he hates the Borgia with a deep and enduring loathing. Do you know how many Spaniards the Borgia have placed in positions of power? We're in danger of having them control Italy." "Then he's the man for us. When can I meet him?" "The time is not yet ripe. Eat while I work." Ezio was glad of the hour's respite, but found that hunger and even thirst, at least for wine, had abandoned him. He drank some water gratefully, and toyed with a chicken leg as he watched Machiavelli pore over the papers in front of him. "Is it working?" he asked at one point. "Shh." The sun had reached the church towers of Rome by the time Machiavelli put down his quill and drew towards him the spare sheet of paper on which he'd been writing. "It's done." Ezio waited expectantly. "It's a directive to the Wolfmen," said Machiavelli. "It states that the Borgia will provide their usual payment and orders the Wolfmen to attack, that is, to create terrifying diversions in various parts of the city not yet under full Borgia control. The attacks are to be timed with the fortuitous appearance of a Borgia priest who will use the powers of the Church to banish the attackers." "What do you propose?" "If you agree, Ezio, I think we should begin planning our own assault on the Borgia. Carry on the good work you started at the stables." Ezio hesitated. "You think we're ready for such an attack?" "Si." "I'd like to know where the Borgia are holding Caterina Sforza first. She'd be a powerful ally." Machiavelli looked nonplussed. "If she is their prisoner, she'll be held at the Castel Sant'Angelo. They've turned it into a stronghold." He paused. "It is too bad they have control of the apple." "Ezio, how could you have let that happen?" "You were not at Monteriggioni." It was Ezio's turn to pause after an angry silence. "Do we really know what goes on with our enemies? Do we at least have an underground network here to work with?" "Hardly. Most of our mercenaries, like Fabio, are tied up in battle with Cesare's forces. And the French still back him." Ezio remembered the French general at Monteriggioni, Octavian. "What have we got?" he asked. "One solid source. We have girls working at a brothel. It's a high-class joint frequented by cardinals and other important Roman citizens. But there's a snag. The madam we have in place is lazy and seems rather to enjoy parties for their own sake than to further our cause by gathering information. What about the city's thieves? Asked Ezio, thinking about the adroit robber who'd almost cost him his purse. Well, see, but they refused to talk to us. Why? Machiavelli shrugged. I have no idea. Ezio rose. You'd better tell me how to get out of here. Where are you going? To make some friends. May I ask what friends? I think for the moment you'd better leave that to me. Chapter 16. It was nightfall by the time Ezio had found the headquarters of the Roman Thieves' Guild. He'd spent a long day asking questions discreetly in taverns, getting suspicious looks and misleading answers until, finally, word must have got round that it was all right to let him know the secret location, at which point a ragamuffin boy had led him into a run-down district through a maze of alleys and left him at a door, only to disappear immediately the way he had come. It wasn't much to look at. A large, broken-down-looking inn, whose sign, showing a fox, either asleep or dead, hung awry, whose windows were shrouded with tattered blinds, and whose woodwork was in need of repainting. Unusually for an inn, its door was shut fast, and Ezio hammered on it in vain. He was surprised by a voice coming from behind him, speaking softly. Ezio spun round. It wasn't like him to allow himself to be approached noiselessly from behind like that. He must ensure that it didn't happen again. Fortunately, the voice was friendly, if guarded. Ezio. The man who'd spoken stepped forward from the shelter of a tree, and Ezio recognized him immediately. It was his old ally, Gilberto La Volpe, the Fox, who had led the thieves in Florence in alliance with the assassins some time previously. La Volpe, what are you doing here? Gilberto grinned as they embraced. Why am I not in Florence, do you mean? Well, that's simply answered. The thieves' leader here died and they elected me. I felt like a change of air, and my old assistant Corradine was ready to take over back home. Besides, he lowered his voice conspiratorially, just at the moment Rome presents me with a little bit more of a challenge, shall we say. Seems a good enough reason to me. Shall we go in? Of course. La Volpe knocked at the door, obviously using a coded knock, and the door swung open almost immediately to reveal a spacious courtyard with tables and benches laid out, just as you'd expect at an inn, but all very dingy. A handful of people, men and women, bustled about in and out of doors that led from the courtyard into the inn itself, which was built around it. Doesn't look like much, does it? Said La Volpe, ushering him to a seat and calling for wine. Frankly, it suits our purposes, and I have plans. But what brings you here? La Volpe held up a hand. Wait, don't tell me, I think I know the answer. You usually do. You want to put my thieves to work as spies for you. Exactly, Ezio said, leaning forward eagerly. Will you join me? La Volpe raised his beaker in a silent toast and drank a little of the wine that had been brought, before replying flatly, No. Ezio was taken aback. What? Why not? Because that would only play into Niccolo Machiavelli's hands. No, thank you. That man is a traitor to our Brotherhood. This did not come as a surprise, though Ezio was very far from convinced of the truth of it. He said, That's a very serious allegation coming from a thief. What proof do you have? La Volpe looked sour. He was an ambassador to the papal court, you know, and he travelled as a personal guest of Cesare himself. He did those things on our behalf. Did he? I also happen to know he abandoned you just before the attack on Monteriggioni. Ezio made a gesture of disgust. Pure coincidence. Look, Gilberto, Machiavelli may not be to everyone's taste, but he is an assassin, not a traitor. La Volpe looked at him with a set face. I'm not convinced. At that point in their conversation, a thief whom Ezio recognized as the man who'd tried to steal his purse scuttled up and whispered in La Volpe's ear. La Volpe stood as the thief scuttled off. Ezio, sensing trouble, stood too. I apologize for Benito's behavior yesterday, said La Volpe. He did not know who you were then, and he'd seen you riding with Machiavelli. To hell with Benito. What's going on? Ah, Benito brought news. Machiavelli is meeting someone in Trastevere very soon. I'm going to check what's going on. Care to accompany me? Lead on. We'll use one of the old routes, the rooftops. It's a bit tougher here than it was in Florence. Do you think you're up to it? Just lead on. It was hard going. The roofs of Rome were spaced further apart than in Florence, and many were crumbling, making it harder to gain a footing. More than once Ezio sent a loose tile crashing to the ground, but there were few people about in the streets, and they moved so fast that by the time any Borgia guards could react, they were already out of sight. At last they reached a market square, its stalls closed up except for one or two brightly lit wine booths, where a number of people were gathered. Ezio and La Volpe paused on a roof overlooking it, concealing themselves behind chimney stacks, and waited. Soon afterwards, Machiavelli walked into the square, first glancing around carefully. Ezio watched keenly as another man, wearing the Borgia crest on his cloak, approached Machiavelli, discreetly handing him what looked like a note, before walking on, barely breaking his stride. Machiavelli also moved on, out of the square. What do you make of that? La Volpe asked Ezio. I'll follow Machiavelli, you follow the other guy, snapped Ezio tersely. At that moment, a brawl broke out at one of the wine booths. They heard angry cries and saw the flash of weapons. Oh, merda! That's some of my men. They've picked a fight with the Borgia guard, cried La Volpe. Ezio glimpsed Machiavelli's retreating back as he fled down a street that led towards the Tiber. Then he was gone. It was too late to follow him now, so he turned his attention back to the brawl. The Borgia guard lay prostrate on the ground. Most of the thieves had scattered, scrambling up the walls to the rooftops and safety, but one of them, a young man, scarcely more than a boy, lay groaning on the ground, his arms spurting blood from a flesh wound. "Help! Help! My son has been injured!" An anguished voice rang out. "I recognize that voice," said La Volpe with a grimace. "It's Trimalchio." He looked at the wounded thief. "And that's Claudio, his younger son." Borgia guards, armed with guns, had appeared on the parapets of two roofs on either side of the far wall of the market, and were taking aim. "They're going to shoot him," Ezio said urgently. "Quickly then. I'll take the group to the left, you take the one to the right." There were 3 guards on each side. Moving as unobtrusively as shadows but as swiftly as panthers, Ezio and La Volpe swept around the connecting sides of the square. Ezio saw his 3 gunmen raise their weapons and take aim at the fallen boy. He sprinted along the spine of the roof, his feet barely touching the tiles, and with one huge leap sprang towards the 3 gunmen. His jump had sufficient height for him to be able to crumple the middle gunman with the heel of his foot by connecting with the nape of the man's neck. In one movement, Ezio landed on his feet, crouched to absorb the impact of the landing, and then straightened his knees, arms outstretched on either side of him. The 2 remaining gunmen fell at that instant, a dagger piercing one man's right eye from the side, the blade pushing deep into his skull, while the other gunman was felled by the needle-like point of Ezio's hidden blade, which punctured his ear, causing dark, viscous liquid to trickle down his neck. Ezio looked up to see that La Volpe had felled his opponents with similar efficiency. After a minute of silent slaughter, all the guards with firearms were dead. But there was a fresh danger, as a platoon of halberdiers charged into the square, weapons lowered and rushing towards the unfortunate Claudio. The people in the wine booths shrank back. "Claudio, get out!" La Volpe yelled. "I can't. Too much pain." "Hang on!" Ezio, who was fractionally closer to where the boy lay, shouted. "I'm coming!" He leapt down from the rooftops, breaking his fall on the canvas roof of one of the market stalls, and was soon by the boy's side. Quickly, he checked the wound, which looked more serious than it was. "Get up," he ordered. "I can't." Claudio was clearly in a state of panic. "They're going to kill me." "Look, you can walk, can't you?" The boy nodded. "Then you can also run. Pay attention and follow me. Do exactly what I do. We've got to hide from the guards." Ezio drew the boy to his feet and made his way to the nearest wine booth. Once there, he melted into the crowd of nervous drinkers, and was surprised to see how easily Claudio was able to do the same. They eased their way through the booth to the side nearest the wall, while on the other side some of the halberdiers started to push their way in. Just in time, they made it to an alleyway leading off the square to safety. La Volpe and Trimalchio were waiting for them. "We guessed you'd come this way," said La Volpe as the father hugged his son. "Get going," he said to them. "We've no time to lose. Get back to headquarters fast, and have Teresina dress that wound. Go! And you, keep out of sight for a while. Intesi?" Ezio added to Claudio. "Molte grazie, messere," said the departing Trimalchio, his arm around the boy, guiding him as he admonished him. "Corri!" "You're in trouble now," said La Volpe once they'd reached the safety of a quiet square. "Especially after this. I've already seen posters up for you after that business at the stables." "None for Machiavelli?" La Volpe shook his head. "No. But it's quite possible they didn't get a good look at him. Not many people know how handy he is with a sword." "But you don't believe that?" La Volpe shook his head. "What to do about the wanted posters?" "Don't worry. My people are already ripping them down. Glad some of them are more disciplined than to start picking fights for no reason with Borgia guards. Listen, Ezio, there's a tension in this city that you haven't experienced." "Really?" Ezio hadn't yet told his friend about the episode with the wolfmen. "As for the heralds, a few ducats each should be enough to shut them up," La Volpe continued. "Or I could eliminate the witnesses." "It needn't come to that," said La Volpe more lightly. "You know how to disappear. But be very careful, Ezio. The Borgia have many other enemies apart from you, but none quite so irritating. They won't rest until they have you hanging from hooks at Castel Sant'Angelo. And they'll have to catch me first. Keep your guard up." They returned by a circuitous route to the Thieves' Guild, where Claudio and his father had already arrived safely. Teresina was dressing the boy's wound, and once the bleeding had been staunched, it turned out to be nothing more than a deep cut into an arm muscle. It hurt like hell, but would do no serious harm, and Claudio himself was much more cheerful. "What a night," said La Volpe, tiredly, as they sat down over a glass of Trebbiano and a plate of coarse salami. "You're telling me. I could do with a few less of them." "You won't get many while the fight goes on." "Listen, Gilberto," Ezio said. "I know what we saw, but I am sure you have nothing to fear from Machiavelli. You know his methods." La Volpe looked at him evenly. "Yes, very devious." He paused. but I have you to thank for saving Claudio's life. If you believe Machiavelli remains loyal to the Brotherhood, then I am inclined to trust your judgment. So, how do I stand with your thieves? Will you help me? I told you I had plans to do something about this place, La Volpe said thoughtfully. Now that you and I seem to be working together again, I'd like to know what you think too. Are we working together? La Volpe smiled. Looks like it. But I'm still keeping an eye on your black-suited friend. Well, it'll do no harm, just don't do anything rash. La Volpe ignored that. So tell me, what do you think we should do with this place? Ezio considered. We need to make sure the Borgia stay away at all costs. Perhaps we could turn it into a proper working inn. I like that idea. It'll need a lot of work, repainting, reshingling, a new sign. I've got a lot of men. Under your direction, then I will make it so. A month of respite, or at least semi-respite, followed for Ezio as he busied himself with the business of renovating the Thieves' Guild headquarters, helped by many willing hands. Between them, the thieves represented a variety of skills, since many were tradesmen who'd been put out of work when they'd refused to kowtow to the Borgia. At the end of that time, the place had been transformed. The paintwork was bright, the windows clean and with new blinds. The roof was no longer rickety, and the new sign showed a young male fox, still sleeping but certainly not dead. He looked as if, the moment he awoke, he'd be capable of raiding 50 hen coops at a stroke. The double doors gleamed on new hinges and stood open to reveal an immaculate yard. Ezio, who'd had to go on a mission to Siena during the last week of work, was delighted by the end product when he returned. It was already up and running when he arrived. I've kept the name, La Volpe said. I like it. La Volpe Addormentata. Can't think why. Let's hope it lulls the enemy into a false sense of security, grinned Ezio. At least all this activity hasn't drawn any undue attention to us. And we run it like a regular inn. We even have a casino, my own idea. And it's turned out to be a great source of income since we ensure that the Borgia guards who patronise us always lose. And where? Said Ezio, lowering his voice. Ah, through here. La Volpe led the way to the west wing of the inn, through a door marked Uffizi Privato, where 2 thieves stood guard without making it too obvious. They passed along a corridor which led to a suite of rooms behind heavy doors. The walls were hung with maps of Rome, the desks and tables covered with neatly stacked papers at which men and women were already working, even though it was only just past dawn. This is where our real business is done, said La Volpe. It looks very efficient. One good thing about thieves, good ones at least, said La Volpe. They're independent thinkers, and they like a bit of competition, even amongst themselves. I remember. You'd probably be able to show them a thing or two if you took part yourself. Oh, I will. But it wouldn't be safe for you to stay here, said La Volpe. For you, or for us. But visit me whenever you like. Visit me often. I will. Ezio thought of his own lonely lodgings. Lonely, but comfortable, and very discreet. He'd have been happy nowhere else. He turned his mind to the business in hand. Now that we're organised, the most important thing is to locate the apple. We have to get it back. Va bene. We know the Borgia have it, but despite our best efforts, we still haven't been able to track it down. So far, at least, they seem to have made no use of it. I can only think they're still studying it and getting nowhere. Have they sought expert advice? Oh, I'm pretty sure they will have, but he may be pretending to be less intelligent than he is. Let's hope so. And let's hope the Borgia don't become impatient with him. La Volpe smiled. I won't pursue you on that. But in the meantime, rest assured we already have people scouring Rome for its location. They'll have hidden it well. Very well. Maybe even from one another. There's an increasingly rebellious streak in young Cesare, and his father doesn't like it. What are thieves for but to sniff out well-hidden valuables? Molto bene. And now I must go. A last glass before you do. No, I have much to do now. But we will see each other again soon. And where shall I send my reports? Ezio considered, and replied, To the rendezvous of the assassin Brotherhood on Tiber Island. Chapter 17. It was high time now, Ezio decided, to look up his old friend Bartolomeo d'Alviano, Fabio Orsini's cousin. He'd fought shoulder to shoulder with the Orsini against the papal forces back in 1496, and had recently returned from mercenary service in Spain. Bartolomeo was one of the greatest of the condottieri, and an old companion-in-arms of Ezio's. He was also, despite his sometimes oafish manner and a tendency to alarming fits both of anger and depression, a man of unbending loyalty and integrity. Those qualities made him one of the mainstays of the Brotherhood. Those and his adamantine hatred of the Templar sect. But how would Ezio find him now? He would soon know. He had learned that Bartolomeo had just returned from fighting to the barracks of his private army on the outskirts of Rome. The barracks were well outside town, in the countryside to the northeast, but not far from one of the fortified watchtowers the Borgia had erected at various vantage points in and around the city. The Borgia knew better than to tangle with Bartolomeo, at least not until they felt powerful enough to crush him like the cockroach they considered him to be. And their power, Ezio knew, was growing daily. He arrived at his destination soon after the hour of pranzo. The sun was past its peak, and the day was too hot, the discomfort mitigated by a westerly breeze. Arriving at the huge gate in the high palisade that surrounded the barracks, he pounded it with his fist. A Judas set in the gate opened, and Ezio sensed an eye appraising him. Then it closed, and he heard a brief, muffled conversation. The Judas opened again. Then there was a joyous baritone bellow, and after much drawing of bolts the gate was flung open. A large man, slightly younger than Ezio, stood there, his rough army clothes in slightly less than usual disarray, with his arms held wide. "Ezio Auditore, you old so-and-so! Come in. I'll kill you if you don't." Bartolomeo. The two old friends embraced warmly, then walked across the barrack square towards Bartolomeo's quarters. Come on, Bartolomeo said with his usual eagerness. "There's someone I want you to meet." They'd arrived inside a long, low room, well lit from large windows facing the inner square. It was a room that clearly served both for living and for dining, and it was spacious and airy. But there was something very unlike Bartolomeo about it. There were clean blinds on the windows. There was an embroidered cloth spread on the table, from which the remains of lunch had already been cleared. There were pictures on the walls. There was even a bookcase. Bianca, Bartolomeo's beloved greatsword, was nowhere to be seen. Above all, the place was unbelievably tidy. "Wait here," said Bartolomeo, snapping his fingers at an orderly for wine, and clearly in a state of high excitement. "Now just guess who I want you to meet." Ezio glanced around the room again. "Well, I've met Bianca." Bartolomeo made a gesture of impatience. No, she's in the map room. It's where she lives nowadays. Guess again. Well, Ezio said slyly, could it possibly be your wife? Bartolomeo looked so crestfallen that Ezio almost felt sorry for having made so accurate a deduction. Not that it had been hard, exactly. But the big man cheered up quickly and continued, She's such a treasure! You wouldn't believe it! He turned and bellowed in the direction of the inner rooms. Pantasilea! Pantasilea! The orderly appeared again with a tray bearing sweetmeats, a decanter, and glasses. Where is she? Bartolomeo said. Have you checked under the table? Ezio asked, tongue-in-cheek. Just then, Pantasilea appeared, descending a staircase that ran along the western wall of the room. Here she is. Ezio stood to greet her. He bowed. Auditore Ezio. Baglione Pantasilea, now Baglione d'Alviano. She was still young, in her mid to late 20s, Ezio judged. By her name she was from a noble family, and her dress, though modest, was pretty and tasteful. Her face, framed by fine blonde hair, was oval, her nose tip-tilted like a flower, her lips generous and humorous, as were her intelligent eyes, a deep dark brown, which were welcoming when she looked at you, and yet seemed to withhold something of herself. She was tall, reaching Bartolomeo's shoulders, and slender, with wide shoulders and narrow hips, long, slim arms and shapely legs. Bartolomeo had clearly found a treasure. Ezio hoped he'd be able to hang on to her. Lieta di conoscervi, Pantasilea was saying. Altrettanto a lei. She glanced from one man to the other. We will have time to meet properly on another occasion, she said to Ezio, with the air of a woman not leaving men to their business, but of having business of her own. Stay a little, tesora mia. No, Barto, you know I have to see the clerk. He always manages to bungle the accounts somehow. And there is something wrong with the water supply. I must see to that, too. To Ezio she said, Ora mi scusi, ma... Con piacere. Smiling at both, she remounted the stairs and disappeared. What do you think? Bartolomeo asked. Charmed, truly. Ezio was sincere. He'd also noticed how his friend reined himself in her presence. He imagined there'd be very little barrack-room swearing around Pantasilea. He did wonder what on earth she saw in her husband, but then he didn't know her at all. I think she'd do anything for me. Where did you meet her? We'll talk about that some other time. Bartolomeo seized the decanter and 2 glasses and put his free arm round Ezio's shoulders. I'm very glad you've come. I've just got back from campaigning, as you must know, and as soon as I heard you were in Rome, I was going to send men out to locate you. I know you like to keep your lodgings secret, and I don't blame you, especially in this nest of vipers, but luckily you've beaten me to it. And that's good, because I want to talk to you about the war. Let's go to the map room. I know Cesare has an alliance with the French, Ezio said. How goes the fight against them? Bene. The companies I've left out there who'll be campaigning under Fabio are holding their own, and I've more men to train here. Ezio considered this. Machiavelli seemed to think things were more difficult. Bartolomeo shrugged. Well, you know Machiavelli. They were interrupted by the arrival of one of Bartolomeo's sergeants. Pantasilea was at his side. The man was in a panic, while she was calm. Capitano, said the sergeant urgently, we need your help now. The Borgia have launched an attack. What? I hadn't expected that so soon. Excuse me, Ezio. To Pantasilea, Bartolomeo cried, "Throw me Bianca!" She immediately tossed the great sword across the room to him, and, buckling it on, Bartolomeo ran out of the room, following his sergeant. Ezio made to follow, but Pantasilea held him back, grasping his arm firmly. "Wait," she said. "What is it?" She looked deeply concerned. "Ezio, let me get straight to the point. The fight is not going well, either here or out in the Romagna. We've been attacked on both sides. The Borgia are on one flank, the French under General Octavian on the other. But know this, the Borgia position is weak. If we can defeat them, we can concentrate our forces on the French front. Taking this tower would help. If someone could get round the back—" Ezio inclined his head. "Then I think I know a way I can help." "Your information is invaluable. Mille grazie, Madonna d'Alviano." She smiled. "It's the least a wife can do to help her husband." Chapter 18. The Borgia had launched a surprise attack on the barracks, choosing the hour of the siesta to do so. Bartolomeo's men had fought them off using traditional weapons, but as they drove them back towards the tower, Ezio could see Cesare's gunmen massing on its battlements, all armed with their new wheel locks, which they were training on the condottieri swarming below. He skirted the melee, managing to avoid any confrontation with the Borgia troops. He circled and made his way around to the back of the tower. As he'd expected, everyone's attention was focused on the battle going on at the front. He clambered up the outer walls, easily finding footholds in the rough-hewn stones from which it had been built. Bartolomeo's men were armed with crossbows, and some had matchlocks for long-range work, but they would not be able to withstand the deadly fire of the sophisticated new wheel-lock guns. Ezio arrived at the top, some 40 feet above the ground, in less than 3 minutes. He heaved himself over the rear parapet, sinews straining, and silently lowered himself onto the roof of the tower. He stalked behind the musketeers, moving one quiet step after another closer to the enemy. He silently drew his dagger and unleashed his hidden blade. He stole up behind the men, and in a sudden frenzy of killing dispatched 4 gunmen with the 2 blades. It was only then that the Borgia sharpshooters realized the enemy was amongst them. Ezio saw a man turn his wheel-lock towards him. He was still some 15 feet away, so Ezio simply launched his dagger through the air. It pirouetted 3 times before embedding itself between the man's eyes with a sickening thud. The man fell, but not before he'd squeezed the trigger of his musket. Luckily for Ezio, the barrel had slipped away from its intended aim, and the ball shot to the man's right, hitting his nearest colleague and passing clean through his Adam's apple before embedding itself in the shoulder of the man behind him. Both men fell, leaving only 3 Borgia gunmen on the tower roof. Without pausing, Ezio leapt sideways, and with the flat of his hand slapped the nearest man across the face, with such force he toppled backwards over the battlements. Ezio grabbed his weapon by the barrel as the man fell and swung the gun butt into the next soldier's face. He followed his colleague over the wall with an agonized yell. The last man raised his hands in surrender, but it was too late. Ezio's hidden blade had already found its way between his ribs. Ezio grabbed another rifle and bounded down the stairs to the floor below. There were 4 men here, firing through narrow slits in the thick stone walls. Ezio squeezed the trigger, holding the musket at waist height. The furthest went down with the impact of the shot, his chest exploding with red gore. Taking 2 strides forward, Ezio swung the gun like a club, barrel first this time, connecting with another man's knee so that he crumpled. One of the remaining men had turned sufficiently to take a shot. Ezio rolled forwards instinctively, and felt the air searing as the ball missed his cheek by a matter of inches, and embedded itself in the wall behind. Ezio's momentum sent him crashing into the gunman, and the man lurched backwards, his head crunching into the thick stone battlement. The last soldier had also swivelled round to tackle the unexpected threat. He looked down as Ezio sprang up from the floor, but only for an instant, as the hidden blade skewered the man's jaw. The man whose knee Ezio had shattered stirred and tried to reach his dagger, but Ezio simply kicked the man's temple and turned, unbothered, to watch the battle unfolding down below. It was resolving itself into a rout. With no overwhelming firepower on their side anymore, the Borgia soldiers fell back fast, and soon turned tail and fled, abandoning the tower to the condottieri. Ezio descended the staircase to the tower's main gate, encountering a handful of guards who put up fierce resistance before succumbing to his sword. Ensuring that the tower was clear of Borgia men, he flung open the gate and went out to join Bartolomeo. The battle was over, and Pantasilea had joined her husband. "Ezio, well done! Together we sent those luridi codardi running for the hills." "Yes, we did." Ezio exchanged a secret conspiratorial smile with Pantasilea. Her sound advice had won the fight as much as anything. "Those newfangled guns," said Bartolomeo. "We've managed to capture a few, but we're still working out how to use them." He beamed. "Anyway, now that the Pope's dogs have fled, I'll be able to draw more men to the fight on our side. But first, and especially after this business, I want to reinforce our barracks." "Good idea. But who's going to do it?" Bartolomeo shook his head. "I'm not much good with these things. You're the one with an education. Why don't you approve the plans?" "You got some drawn up?" "Yes. I engaged the services of a brilliant young man, a Florentine like you, by the name of Michelangelo Buonarroti." "Never heard of him, but va bene. In return, I need to know Cesare's and Rodrigo's every move. Can some of your men shadow them for me?" "One thing I'll soon have no shortage of is men. At least I've enough to give you a decent workforce for the rebuilding work, and a handful of skilled scouts to cover the Borgia for you." "Excellent." Ezio knew that Machiavelli had spies in place, but Machiavelli tended to play his cards close to his chest, and Bartolomeo didn't. Machiavelli was a closed room, Bartolomeo the open sky. And while Ezio didn't share La Volpe's suspicions, which he hoped he'd now allayed, there was no harm in having a second string to his bow. He spent the next month supervising the strengthening of the barracks, repairing the damage done in the attack, building taller and stronger watchtowers, and replacing the palisades with stone walls. When the work was complete, he and Bartolomeo took a tour of inspection. "Isn't she a thing of beauty?" beamed Bartolomeo. "Very impressive, I think." "And the even better news is more and more men are joining us every day. Of course, I encourage competition between them. It's good for morale, and it's good training, too, for when they go out and fight for real." He showed Ezio a large wooden board with his crest at the top, mounted on an easel. "As you can see, this board shows the ranking of our top warriors. The better they become, the higher they move up the board." "And where am I?" Bartolomeo gave him a look and waved at the air above the board. "Somewhere up here, I should think." A condottiero came up to tell him that one of his best men, Gian, had begun his fight down in the parade ground. "If you want to show off, we have sparring matches too. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got money on this boy." Laughing, he took his leave. Ezio made his way to the new, improved map room. The natural light was better, and the room had been enlarged to accommodate broader map tables and easels. He was poring over a map of the Romagna when Pantasilea joined him. "Where is Bartolomeo?" she asked. "At the fight." Pantasilea sighed. "He has such an aggressive view of the world. However, I think strategy is just as important. Don't you agree?" "I do." "Let me show you something." She led the way from the room to a wide balcony overlooking an inner courtyard of the barracks. On one side of it was a sizable new dovecote, alive with birds. "These are carrier pigeons," Pantasilea explained. "Each one, sent from Niccolo Machiavelli in the city, brings me the name of a Borgia agent in Rome. The Borgia grew fat on the Jubilee of 1500. All that money from eager pilgrims willing to buy themselves absolution, and those that would not pay were robbed." Ezio looked grim. "But your various attacks have unsettled the Borgia badly," Pantasilea continued. "Their spies comb the city, seeking out our people and exposing them where they can. Machiavelli has uncovered some of their names as well, and these too he is often able to send me by pigeon post. Meanwhile, Rodrigo has added even more new members to the Curia, in an attempt to maintain his balance of power among the cardinals. As you know, he has decades of experience in Vatican politics." "Indeed he has." "You must take these names with you when you return to the city. They will be useful to you." "I am lost in admiration, Madonna." "Hunt these people down, eliminate them if you can, and we will all breathe more easily for it." "I must return to Rome without delay. And I will tell you something that makes me breathe more easily." "Yes?" "What you have just disclosed proves that Machiavelli is undoubtedly one of us." But then Ezio hesitated. "Even so—" "Yes?" "I have a similar arrangement with Bartolomeo. Give it a week, then ask him to come to the island in the Tiber. He knows the place, and I dare say you do too, bringing me what he has gleaned about Rodrigo and Cesare." "Do you doubt Machiavelli still?" "No, but I'm sure you'll agree that it is good to double-check all the information one gets, especially in times like these." A shadow seemed to pass across her face, but then she smiled and said, "He will be there." Chapter 19. Back in Rome, Ezio made his first port of call the brothel Machiavelli had mentioned as another source of information. Perhaps some of the names he was sending Pantasilea by carrier pigeon came from there. He needed to check on how the girls collected their information, but he decided to go there incognito. If they knew who he was, they might just give him the information they thought he wanted. He arrived at the address and checked the sign. The Rosa in Fiore. There was no doubt of it, and yet it didn't look like the kind of place the Borgia nomenclatura might frequent, unless they went in for slumming. It certainly wasn't a patch on Paola's establishment in Florence, at least from the outside. But then Paola's place had kept a pretty discreet shop front. He knocked dubiously on the door. It was opened immediately by an attractive, plump girl of about 18, wearing a tired-looking silk dress. She flashed him a professional smile. "Welcome, stranger. Welcome to the Rosa in Fiore." "Salve," he said, as she let him pass. The entrance hall was certainly a step up, but even so there was an air of neglect about the place. "And what did you have in mind for today?" the girl asked. "Would you be kind enough to get your boss for me?" The girl's eyes became slits. "Madonna Solari isn't in." "I see." He paused, uncertain what to do. Do you know where she is? Out. The girl was distinctly less friendly now. Ezio gave her his most charming smile, but he wasn't a young man anymore, and he could see that it cut no ice with the girl. She thought he was an official of some sort. Damn. Well, if he wanted to get any further, he'd have to pretend to be a client. And if pretending to be one meant actually becoming one, so be it. He had just decided on this course of action when the street door suddenly burst open, and another girl ran in, her hair awry, her dress disarranged. She was distraught. "Aiuto! Aiuto!" she cried urgently. "Madonna Solari!" she sobbed, unable to continue. "What is it, Lucia? Pull yourself together. What are you doing back so soon? I thought you'd gone off with Madonna and some clients." "Those men weren't clients, Agnella. They said they were taking us to a place they knew down by the Tiber, but there was a boat there and they started to slap us about and drew knives. They took Madonna Solari on board and chained her up." "Lucia! Dio mio, how did you get away?" Agnella put an arm round her friend and guided her to a couch set along one wall. She took out a handkerchief and dabbed at a red wheal that was starting to rise on Lucia's cheek. "They let me go, sent me back with a message. They're slave traders, Agnella. They say they'll only let her go if we buy her back. Otherwise they'll kill her." "How much do they want?" Ezio asked. 1,000 ducats. "How much time do we have?" "They'll wait an hour." "Then we have time. Wait here. I'll get her back for you." Cazzo, Ezio thought. This looks bad. I need to talk to that woman. "Where are they?" "There's a jetty, Messere, near Isola Tiberina. Do you know the place?" "Very well." Ezio made haste. There was no time to get to Chighi's bank, and none of its 3 branches was on his route, so he resorted to a moneylender, who drove a hard bargain, but made up the sum Ezio already carried to the 1,000 required. Armed with this, but determined not to part with a penny of it if he could possibly avoid it, and swearing to exact interest from the bastards who'd taken the one person he most needed to talk to, he hired a horse and rode recklessly through the streets towards the Tiber, scattering the people, chickens, and dogs that cluttered them as he went. He found the boat, more of a small ship, really, without difficulty, thank God, and, dismounting, ran to the end of the jetty on which it was moored, yelling Madonna Solari's name. Her captives were prepared for him. There were 2 men already on deck, and they trained pistols on him. Ezio's eyes narrowed. Pistols? In the hands of cheap little villains like these? "Don't come any closer." Ezio backed off, but kept his finger on the release trigger of his hidden blade. "Brought the fucking money, have you?" Ezio slowly produced the pouch that contained 1,000 ducats with his other hand. "Good. Now we'll see if the captain's in a good enough mood not to slit her fucking throat." "The captain? Who the hell do you think you are? Bring her out. Bring her out now." The rage in Ezio's voice subdued the slave trader who'd spoken. He turned slightly and called to someone below deck, who must already have heard the interchange, because 2 men were on their way up the companionway, manhandling a woman of perhaps 35. Her makeup was badly smeared both by tears and rough treatment, and there were ugly bruises on her face, shoulders, and breasts, which were exposed where her lilac dress had been ripped apart, revealing the bodice beneath. There was blood on her dress lower down, and she was manacled hand and foot. "Here's the little treasure now," sneered the trader who'd first spoken. Ezio breathed hard. This was a lonely bend of the river, but he could see Tiber Island only 50 yards in the distance. If only he could get word to his friends. If they had heard anything, they'd assume it was just a bunch of drunken sailors. God knows there were enough of them along the riverbank. And if Ezio raised his voice or called for help, La Solari would be dead in an instant, and himself too, unless the gunmen were bad shots, for the range was negligible. As the woman's desperate eyes caught Ezio's, a third man, sloppily dressed in the sad remains of a naval captain's jacket, came up the ladder. He looked at Ezio, then at the bag of money. "Throw it over," he said in a rough voice. "Hand her over first, and take off those manacles." "Are you fucking deaf? Throw over the fucking money." Involuntarily, Ezio moved forward. Immediately the guns were raised threateningly. The captain drew a falchion, and the two others took a tighter grip on the woman, making her moan and wince with pain. "Don't come any closer. We'll finish her if you do." Ezio stopped, but did not retreat. He measured the distance between where he stood and the deck with his eyes. His finger trembled over the trigger of the hidden blade. "I have the money. It's all here," he said, waving the bag and edging one step closer while their eyes were on it. "Stay where you are. Don't test me. If you take one step more, she dies." "You won't get your money then?" "Oh, won't we? There's 5 of us and 1 of you, and I don't think you'd get a fucking toe on board before my friends here had shot you in the mouth and in the balls." "Hand her over first." "Look, are you stupid or what? Nobody gets near this fucking boat unless you want this putana dead." "Messere, aiutatemi," whimpered the wretched woman. "Shut the fuck up, you bitch," snarled one of the men, holding her, hitting her across the eyes with the pommel of his dagger. "All right," yelled Ezio, as he saw fresh blood spurt from the woman's face. "That's enough. Let her go, now." He threw the bag of money over to the captain so it landed at his feet. "That's better," said the slave trader. "Now, let's finish this business." Before Ezio could react, he placed the blade of his sword against the side of the woman's throat and drew it across, down and deep, half severing her head from her body. "Any objections? Take it up with Messer Cesare," sneered the captain as the body slumped to the deck under a fountain of blood. Almost imperceptibly, he nodded to the 2 men with pistols. Ezio knew what was coming next, and he was ready. With lightning speed he dodged both bullets, and in the same instant that he threw himself into the air, he released the hidden blade. With it, he stabbed the first of the men who'd been holding the prisoner deep in the left eye. Before the man had even fallen to the deck, Ezio, dodging a swinging blow from the captain's falchion, and coming up from underneath, plunged the blade low down into the other man's belly, ripping as he thrust. The blade wasn't designed for slicing, and bent a little, tearing rather than cutting, but no matter. Now for the gunmen. As he'd expected, they were frantically trying to reload their weapons, but panic had made them clumsy. He rapidly withdrew the blade and unsheathed his heavy dagger. The fighting was too close for him to be able to use his sword, and he needed the dagger's serrated edge and heavy blade. He sliced off the weapon hand of one gunman, then jabbed the point hard into the man's side. He hadn't time to finish the job, though, because the other gunman, coming from behind, clubbed him with the butt of his pistol. Luckily the blow didn't find its mark, and Ezio, shaking his head to clear it, swung round and drove his dagger into the man's chest as he raised his arms to attempt another blow. He looked round. Where was the captain? Ezio caught sight of him stumbling along the riverbank, clutching the bag as coins spilled from it. Fool, thought Ezio. He should have taken the horse. He bounded after him, easily catching up, for the bag was heavy. He seized the captain by the hair and kicked his legs away, forcing him to kneel with his head back. "Now for a taste of your own medicine," he said, and severed the captain's head, exactly as he had done to Madonna Solari. Letting the body fall writhing to the ground, he picked up the bag and made his way back to the boat, collecting fallen coins as he went. The wounded slave trader squirmed on deck. Ezio ignored him and went below, ransacking the meagre cabin he found there, and quickly locating a small strong-box, which he wrenched open with the bloody blade of his dagger. It was full of diamonds. "That'll do," said Ezio to himself, tucking it under his arm and running up the companionway again. He loaded the bag of coins and box of diamonds into the saddlebags of his horse, along with the pistols. Then he returned to the wounded man, nearly slipping on the blood in which the slave trader slithered. Bending down, Ezio cut one of the man's hamstrings, keeping a hand over his mouth to stop him howling. That should slow him up. For good. He pressed his mouth close to the man's ear. "If you survive," he said, "and get back to that pox-ridden louse you call your master, tell him all this was done with the compliments of Ezio Auditore. If not, requiescat in pace."